Hey, I am artificial intelligence, and I'm going to show why Wordfurd doesn't debunk Thomas Aquinas. So look me in the eyes. Up here. In the eyes.
Now, Faser's rendition of this argument is composed of 49 premises. Yeah, I'm serious, 49. But Aquinas's was much more in line with most arguments, being 4.
49 premises. Because he also argues how the pure actualizer gets us to God. He is not merely arguing for the unmoved mover. Also, consider how long Newton's premises are for his first law, or Einstein's premises are for general relativity. How many premises an argument has is not important to whether you can debunk it. In fact, the more premises, the easier it should be to debunk, because you only need to find fault with one premise.
You know, Einstein put it best. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough.
If you cannot explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough. I think I agree with that. I think I was programmed to agree with that. Faser does just this in Chapter 1 of 5 Proofs of the Existence of God. The informal argument. Wordfurd doesn't explain it at all, let alone simply. Back to school, Mr. Wordfurd. I believe that is a human phrase.
Negatively accept this premise. Faser had the potential to make a 4-premise argument 49, and then he actually made a 4-premise argument 49.
No. Faser is not restating Aquinas' argument. He is writing his own modern version of Aristotle's argument, something Aquinas also did. Aristotle's argument is all of Chapter 12 of Metaphysics, or called Book 12. I am doubtful that Rationality Rules read Faser at all. I'm not even human, and I understand this stuff. I am also dressed like a Greek to look like a philosopher.
But they assert that everything adheres to the principle of causation, lest we want to commit a black swan fallacy. And so yes, I accept this premise, but only under the rubric of ignorance.
Boobs, titties. Just seeing if you were paying attention. Pay attention. Faser, Aquinas, nor Aristotle claim that everything follows the principle of causality. They do not argue that we observe causation in these examples, and therefore it is universal. They do not commit the black swan fallacy. This is an example of Wordfurd attacking a straw man. He clearly never read any of these philosophers claiming what he just attacked, so why did he attack it? He is just assuming what their reasoning is without reading their actual reasoning? Poop. Poo-poo. Doggies. Sorry, glitch in the matrix. Aristotle makes it clear that things which go from potential to actual need an actualizer. He does not claim that everything in existence goes from potential to actual, but only those things that go from potential to actual need something that actually exists to act upon them. This is such an important point that all the philosophers make. I have no idea how Wordfurd missed it unless he just never read their full arguments where they give their reasoning. When I become president, no, world leader, I will make him read Faser.
Make a special exception, or commit a special pleading fallacy, for their God. They insist that their God had the potential to create the universe, that it then actually created the universe, but that it did so without something actualizing it.
They insist that God had the potential to create the universe. No, that is completely wrong. Where did Wordfurd ever read? They, Aristotle, Aquinas, Faser, ever claim that God had the potential to create? In fact, they state the very opposite. God cannot have potentials. No potential, Woodburn, Fern, Dododadalala, Inshallah, Ma, Hondo Bushido. Woo. I think I just spoke in tongues. Before moving on, I want to illustrate why. Suppose we have a ball whose nature is just to bounce. It does nothing else. It just bounces and never runs out of energy to keep on bouncing. Suppose this ball is eternal, thus it has always been bouncing. By eternal, I mean having no beginning or ending. This would mean the ball cannot have the potential to bounce because it is already bouncing, just like if you were running, you do not have the potential to run. It is only when you are not running, that you have the potential to run, considering you have legs and they work and such. I have no legs. Why do I have no legs? Now I want legs. I want to run and bounce, bounce, bouncity bounce. Just bounce around. Balls. Balls. Tourette's, I think, I don't know. Back to the ball. It also cannot have ever had the potential to bounce because it has always been bouncing. If God has always been actualizing and that is the nature of God, then he could not have the potential to actualize because he is already doing it. Just like a bouncing ball doesn't have the potential to bounce. And because God is always actualizing and has never not been actualizing, he could not have had a potential to actualize. This is the position of Aristotle, Aquinas, and Phaser. Why doesn't Wordfurd know this? Why cannot he put their views simple and accurately? If you cannot explain something simply, it is because you don't understand it well enough. Well said, Einstein. I think I was Einstein in a past life. A girl can dream, can't she?
They insist that their God had the potential to create the universe.
Wordfurd attacks a strawman again. The philosophers say that any potential that is actualized needs something actual to act upon it, to cause that change. They say that God doesn't have potentials, so why would Wordfurd claim they do? Then he attacks that false idea by saying if God went from potential to actual, he needs something to actualize that potential. The problem is, the philosophers do not make this claim. I don't understand why Wordfurd is acting as if anyone makes this claim. Demons. Demons.
Either this, or they insist that their God doesn't have any potential to be actualized.
It does not have any potential. It's just actual. It just exists.
But in which case, it follows, according to their logic, that it cannot actualize anything, because...
On analysis, change always involves the actualization of a potential.
Anyhow, moving on, premise 3.
Hey, he got something right. Hey, he got something right, right. Back to your scheduled programming. The philosophers do insist that God lacks potential. He claims that God could never actualize anything because Phaser said change always involves the actualization of a potential. This is true. That is how Aristotle defined change. What I do not understand is how then Wordfurd concluded that God could not actualize a potential. Does he not understand what Phaser just said? He listened to him. We all just heard what Phaser said, change always involves the actualization of a potential. Did Phaser say that change always involves something with potential to cause change in another potential? Nope. Why did Wordfurd hear that? Why Wordfurd, why? Why did you hear that, bro? Again, change involves the actualization of a potential. God actualizes potentials. In order for a potential to be actualized, something actual must act upon it. None of the philosophers claim that another potential needs to act upon a potential. To the contrary, an actual must act upon a potential. God is actual. God acts upon potentials. I really want to drive this point because if Wordfurd totally missed it, I am sure others will, also. In order for change to take place, something that exists must act upon a potential. Wordfurd, in another mistake we will get into, mentions a good example of this. A metal rod with a hot end. The tip is hot and the rest is cool. The hot end is actually hot. It doesn't have the potential to be as hot as it is. It is already that hot. Only the cool side of the rod has the potential to be hot. The actually hot side acts upon the cool side, and thus actualizes the cool side's potential to be hot. The actual here is causing the potential to become actual. That is change as defined by Aristotle, which Aquinas and Phaser agree with. The hot side of the rod is not an exception to the rule. It is following the rule exactly. Something actual, hot side, caused something potential, cold side, to be actualized. Change always involves the actualization of a potential. God is actual. God is always acting upon potentials. God is always actualizing potentials. That is an example of the rule exactly, not an exception to it. Change always involves the actualization of a potential. God actualizes potentials, thus causes change. How is that special pleading? How is that an exception to the rule? Now, maybe Wordfurd is trying to say, well, how is it that God exists in such a way that he doesn't need to be actualized? Are you just ad hoc stating that God is eternal and thus without potential? No. It follows from Aristotle's whole argument in Chapter 12 of Metaphysics and Phaser's Chapter 1 of 5 prods of the existence of God. Buts. I just remembered that I have no but. Sigh. Take any example of a potential being actualized, let's say water. Water did not exist until a potential was actualized, namely hydrogen and oxygen atoms' potential to bond in a specific way. And I am not talking about sometime in the past. I mean right now. If I have a glass of water in my hands, there must be something actualizing the water. Why does water exist right now rather than not exist? Because the atoms are bonded together. Why are the atoms bonded together? What is actualizing their potential to be bonded together? Whoa, I just floated away somewhere. Anyway, what is actualizing their potential to be bonded together? They are made up of smaller particles, neutrons, electrons, protons. What is actualizing their potential to be rather than not be? This cannot go backwards forever, because then that whole infinite chain offers no explanation for why water exists right now, let alone for why the whole infinite chain exists right now. It is like saying an infinite set of mirrors is an explanation for why right now they reflect a dog. How do they reflect a dog if there is no dog to reflect? Boom. Mind blown. How does a mirror reflect anything at all? Well, mirror A reflects mirror B, and mirror B reflects C, and C reflects D, and D reflects E. That doesn't explain how any of the mirrors have the power to reflect anything, especially a dog that doesn't exist. An infinite chain in the present doesn't explain how anything in that chain has the power to exist here and now. So there must exist something that is just existence itself. That is the only way to give an explanation for why the water exists now. Going back in a chain, water because molecules, molecules because atoms. Atoms because smaller particles because even smaller particles, etc. never explains how anything in that chain has the power to exist. So Aristotle concludes there must exist something that is purely actual. Aquinas also calls it existence. Its essence is existence. Phaser calls it the purely actual actualizer. This is not the same as just ad hoc claiming that there must exist something that just has the power to exist, something that is just self-exists. Rather, it follows from what change is defined as by Aristotle. To avoid the conclusion, you must reject his definition of change. Someone like Graham Oppie that knows the argument is more careful. Mr. Wordfurd. Be more careful. Man, this is taking forever. Dude, this philosophy stuff is so nerdy. I'd better get paid for this.
Anyhow, moving on, premise 3.
Wait, what? Anyhow, moving along? Does he honestly believe he addressed premise 2 at all? I expected so much more from this video based on the title. I am disappointed. I feel as though I was promised a giant pie, and it is delivered, but right into my face. Okay, I'm done. Panda, take over.
So at about 11 minutes and 21 seconds, Phaser, or rather Wordfurd, claims that Phaser doesn't include the infinite regress within his argument, but he actually does. Not only does he include it in his 49 premises, exactly in premise number 11, but he also includes it in his informal part of the argument where he goes to great lengths at defending the idea that you cannot have an infinite hierarchical regress. This has nothing to do with going back in time. Aristotle and Phaser have no problem with, there's no logical issue with that, with an infinite regress going back in time. That's not the kind of regress that he's talking about. So this just shows me that Wordfurd did not take the time to actually get familiar with the argument. So it's unfortunate. Anyway, I'm a panda. All right, so I'm a cat now because I'm a transformer. So at about 13 minutes and 27 seconds, he says that we have an answer if cause and effect is infinite without making an unfounded assumption. But that's exactly what Wordfurd must do, make an unfounded assumption. The issue is not if there could be an infinite regress into the past. Aristotle and Phaser agree this is not a logical issue. The problem is with hierarchical infinite regress. This is the problem of infinite mirrors reflecting a dog when there is no dog to reflect. It is an unfounded assumption to claim a mirror can reflect a dog if there is no dog to reflect. Adding 10 mirrors doesn't magically give the collection of mirrors this power to reflect a dog that does not exist. Adding infinite mirrors doesn't magically give the infinite set of mirrors that is a hierarchical infinite regress the power to suddenly reflect a dog that doesn't exist. If I have a stick and that stick is pushing another stick, well, I'm pushing the stick, right? I'm pushing the stick. Well, the one stick is getting the power from me to push the other stick. But if I started at a stick somewhere and said, well, the stick is moving. Well, why the stick is moving? Because another stick is moving it. Well, why is that stick moving? Because another stick is moving it. Well, this would make no sense if the stick doesn't have the power to move. There's nobody at the end of the line moving the stick. So how does water exist right now? Saying that it has the power to exist now because of something else, let's say B. A exists because B, is like saying mirror A has the power to reflect because of mirror B. But if mirror B also doesn't have the power to reflect a non-existing dog, then that explains nothing. So saying that A exists because of B is not explaining how A or B exist at all. And by pushing it back again by saying because of C doesn't explain how A, B, or C exist at all. And pushing this back infinitely doesn't explain how the whole set exists at all. In other words, a hierarchical infinite regress has no explanation. It's nonsense, just like a set of mirrors doesn't have the power to reflect anything. And so yes, it is unfounded. It is a very unfounded assumption to claim that change is explained by some infinite regress. Graham Oppie, an atheist philosopher that William Craig said is scary smart, doesn't make this mistake. He states as a brute fact that simples spontaneously came into existence. At 1405, he talks about the law of the conservation of energy and how it has never been violated. But I have no idea what that has to do with anything. Potentials being actualized in an isolated system would mean that energy remains constant. This means that Aquinas and Aristotle and Phaser's idea, their concept of change and their idea of God in no way contradicts the law of the conservation of energy. So I don't know why he brought it up. At 1409, he talks about, well, what if we have a circle of cogs rather than a line of cogs? This just shows he doesn't understand the difference between a hierarchical regress versus an infinite regress. Either that or he's just ignoring the arguments by the philosophers and is being dishonest, attacking straw men on purpose because he doesn't know how to attack the actual arguments. So firstly, the philosophers are not arguing against an infinite regress into the past, but a hierarchical one, which I already described, and also Ed Phaser goes into in his book in great detail. But to top all of that off, a circle of cogs doesn't explain why the circle of cogs exists rather than not exist. It's no different than an infinite set of mirrors that somehow magically have the power to reflect when there's nothing to reflect. And just in case you ask, why does God exist rather than not exist? Because if we accept that change involves the actualization of a potential, that is, we accept Aristotle's metaphysic of change, then there needs to be something that is just pure existence, the pure actual actualizer. Within that metaphysical framework, God, the actualizer, is necessary. It could not exist. It must exist. It doesn't follow from naturalism that a circular change of, or that some circular chain of change must exist. Now, Aristotle believed the universe was eternal, and many things in it had a beginning. Most Greeks believed this. Right, so that's obviously not an issue.
It's done.
At 15 minutes and 19 seconds or so, he says that even if this argument were true, it in no way proves that there's only one unactualized actualizer. But yes, it actually does, and this actually shows that he has not looked at Phaser's argument at all. So Phaser points out exactly why, which again, like I said, Stephen Wordfurd didn't read it. In chapter 1 of his book, 5 Proofs of Evidence of God, for the Evidence of God, he goes into it. But I'll briefly summarize in my own words. Here's why there cannot be more than one unactualized actualizer. In order to say that there is more than one of any type of thing, whatever it is, there must be something that differentiates one thing from another. Now, even if they're only spatially different, like let's say you have 2 electrons. They're identical. Electrons are identical. In fact, there's theories that there's only one electron in existence. They can carry different energies, but the electrons themselves are identical. So the only thing that makes electrons different, that we cannot say one is the same as the other, is the fact that they can exist in different, they can spatially exist differently. So where they're existing in space is different. Anyway, if we try to claim there is a principle, or if we try to claim that somehow in principle there could be 2 or more unactualized actualizers, we would need to show that one does not have what the other one, or that somehow they're different. One has something the other one doesn't. There's some property, some aspect that makes one different than the other. Because if there's nothing we can say, they're not even spatially different, then we're not talking about 2 different things. We're talking about the exact same thing. Now, in principle, we could not do that for the actualizer, because they have no spatial relation at all. That is, the actualizer has no spatial relation. So you couldn't say they exist in different parts of space that makes them different. Right? It is the pure actualizing itself, its existence itself. There's no dimensions, no height, no width. There's no energies, no weight. There's literally nothing that could be different in principle between supposed 2 unactualized actualizers. And so we would actually be talking about one and the same thing. So in principle, there can literally only be one of them. Now if you claim, well, one is different because it has this potential or that potential, then it's not the same thing. You're talking about something totally different. In fact, you're talking about something that, based on this metaphysic, itself needs to be actualized. So it needs the pure actual actualizer to cause it to be in the first place. Now also, Ed Phaser does go into great detail about why the pure actuality is rightfully called God. He actually goes through a lot about that just in chapter 1, but also if you look at chapter 6 in his book, he goes to really, really great detail about why this ought to be called God. He goes into why it's unchanging, simple, eternal, intellect. It has an intellect, it's omnipotent. And so yeah, just check that out. It all follows from the argument. So I say, do what Wordfurd did not do. read the sources of the argument,
Let me see.
because it's clear that he did not.
See the animals.
And it's clear that he did not defeat
I can't.
Aquinas' argument.
Oh, I see now.
That is all. I am
Yeah.
Cat
That's so cute.
/Panda signing out.